Hello, Seraph community. I'm Willa Bennett. I'm a reader, I'm a writer, very, very literate, and I'm here with the amazing Meg Thompson, who will introduce herself in just a minute. But we're so excited to kick things off, and thank you for watching.
Hey, my name is Meg Thompson. I run a literary agency in New York City. I represent authors and help them sell their books to publishing houses and manage their careers.
Let's get right into it. It's so good to see you.
It's so good to see you too.
I'm so excited to hear about everything. I want to start at the beginning. Like, what was your first job and what was that experience like?
Well, I moved to New York City from Lubbock, Texas, which is an extremely small conservative town. I could not wait to get out. And I went to NYU and studied English literature. I had no idea what I was going to do with that. And then one night I went to a nightclub that you're probably too young to remember called Bungalow 8. And it was all the rage. And I met the director of the Clinton Foundation. And he said that they were looking for someone to work on President Clinton's book. And I jumped at the chance and I applied and I got the job. And I have to tell you, it was probably the most difficult job I've ever had because President Clinton, as wonderful as he is, he's Southern, just like I am. And sometimes we tend toward the superlative in a sort of Mark Twainish sort of way. So it was my job as a 22-year-old to tell this former president when he was wrong.
How did you navigate that relationship being this like young woman who just graduated and clearly like saw the world so differently than him? Like, what did that teach you about yourself professionally?
I got really tough at a very young age, and I learned how to deal with, I guess, you know, the center of the patriarchy and stand up to someone who's really powerful for their own good, to save them from themselves.
Wow, and at what point did you decide to move to the next position?
President Clinton had the same agent as Charlie Rose, who had his own television show at the time. So his agent introduced me to Charlie. So he hired me to do all of the research for his book. And once I had done all of the research, he was sort of like, okay, now you can write it. And at that point, I was, I think, 26 or 27. And I was like, I'm not ghosting Charlie Rose's book. That's insane. Like, he's a genius. So I stayed on with him and worked on research and producing and writing the literary talent that he would book on his show.
Was there ever a point in these like first two big experiences where you were like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing?
No, I knew, I think even at that young age, that I had to work for myself at some point, and wanted to do something in the literary world on my own. I just didn't know what it was yet.
Was the second position hard for you to leave? What was the moment where you were like, next?
It was really hard for me to leave.
Wow, of course.
But not for the reason you would think. I wanted to leave, so I told Mr. Rose that I was leaving, and he basically said, you're never gonna work in this town again. Like, he actually said that. And I remember calling my parents in Texas in tears, and just saying, you know, repeating what he said, and they were like, people actually say that. And I was like, I guess so, in this industry.
Wow.
So I sort of went behind his back, and I did go meet with publishers on the editorial side, because I thought I wanted to be an editor. And got hired by a guy named Larry Kirschbaum, who was running Time Warner Book Group.
Wow.
And went back to Charlie, told him I had the job, and Charlie said, great, I'll write you a beautiful reference. I don't think he had remembered like saying that I would never work again, because he was just in one of his sort of moods.
So you accepted this job. He wrote you a beautiful recommendation, which do you still have it?
I do.
Where is it? Is it like?
I have it, and I have one from President Clinton as well.
Wow.
So that was helpful, definitely,
That's
to
crazy.
get this gig. But yeah, so I got hired by Larry Kirschbaum, and 2 weeks into it, he was like, I'm actually leaving. He was the president and publisher of Time Warner. He said, I'm leaving and I'm going to start a literary agency, you know, come with me and I'll train you on how to be an agent. And like in the literary world, it's like the publisher's on one side of the table, the agent's on the other. And, you know, the agent is selling to the publisher, negotiating with the publisher. Like, we literally call them like the other side of the table. So people were shocked that he was crossing over to the other side of the table. And I was a little disappointed, honestly, because I just thought, you know, the publisher side was so much more classy and like literary. So I was like, oh, I don't think I can be an agent. Like, I don't want to like do deals and, you know, whatever. That's what I thought about it. But when I watched him sell, it actually seemed really fun. So I sort of got into it and asked him, you know, if I could be an agent too. And he promoted me.
Wow.
So I became an agent working for him. The first book I ever sold on my own as an agent, I sold to Knopf. We got 16 rejections for that book. And Knopf was the only publisher who offered, and they're like the cream of the crop. So that just goes to show you, it only takes one.
What was the first, this is one of my favorite questions, like was the first thing you bought when you sold that book? Like what was the thing you bought yourself?
Like for myself?
Yeah.
A briefcase.
Wow. When I wrote my first magazine cover story, I went and bought a suit. So a briefcase, was it for work?
Yeah. It was for work, to carry my manuscripts, because now I was, you know, doing my thing. Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. How did you go from, because you're still working for someone at the time, like what was the pivot to your own company?
It was another sort of trial by fire thing. My boss, Larry, got poached from that agency to go to Amazon. And he didn't want to do the work of kind of unwinding the company. So I was the biggest earner, along with another agent there, Susanna Einstein, and he just left it to us to take over. So we took it over.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity. So I managed that for about, I think we were together for like 4 years, and then we amicably split. And I started my own eponymous literary agency about 5 years ago.
Wow.
So now I'm on my own, and I love it. I absolutely love it.
Okay, I want to talk about how coming out kind of influenced this trajectory you were on, and, you know, at what point in this story did you start to have those conversations with yourself?
Oh, it's such a complicated question and such a good one. I guess I've always identified as bisexual, but growing up in Lubbock, Texas, I sort of hid my relationships with women and was straight passing. When I moved to New York, obviously I became much more in touch with my queerness, but I still had that like Southern thing where I was like, no, even if you're queer, like you need to marry a man and like check those boxes off. So I made that mistake and realized it relatively quickly and actually got a divorce after 8 months of marriage.
Wow.
So that was traumatic, but I knew in my heart that I'm just more attracted to women. And so I couldn't put myself or my ex-husband through that. So that happened. Everyone, you know, that's when I still had my own agency. So I then had to come out to my staff, to, you know, the publishing world. And I think the reaction was just like utter shock. So when I met my now wife and started to introduce her to people within that world, it was tough. I was completely proud, and you know, she's wonderful. She's a graphic designer who was the art director at Vibe magazine forever, and
wow.
She's a book designer. We have a ton in common. We have a beautiful relationship. But I did have someone who worked for me who I thought was incredibly liberal and, you know, accepting of queerness, and I could just tell immediately that her opinion of me had changed. And she ended up leaving and going to like a big talent agency, and it sort of got back to me through the publishing grapevine, which is very insular, that she left because she no longer thought I was a good role model.
Wow.
So there were some dispiriting things, but I also met like a wonderful group of queer editors who have become like very, very good friends.
So much of your job is like taste in books and like having this like foresight of stories. Like how did this like personal growth influence the way you were actually started connecting to stories and the type of people you wanted to represent?
That's such a good question. I feel like with Trump's election, with Christine Blasey Ford's testimony at the Kavanaugh hearings, with the murder of George Floyd, we've only become more of an activist agency. Right when Trump was elected, I started donating heavily to Planned Parenthood and getting very into that. And then I had the opportunity to meet Cecile Richards, who was the head of Planned Parenthood at the time, and the daughter of Ann Richards, the former governor of Texas. And I signed her. And that was my first like very, very big deal monetarily. And it was her memoir about her life as an activist, her whole life as an activist, and then running Planned Parenthood, and then what she was up against when Trump was elected, when he was trying to defund it. And, great stories about her meeting privately with Jared and Ivanka, and they're like, listen, we'll keep funding you if you just stop doing abortions. And she was like, that is not going to happen ever. So I would say sort of coming out and just events in America made my agency very much an activist agency, and looking for queer voices, looking for marginalized voices to lift up. And after the murder of George Floyd, I talked to my staff and I said, would you guys be comfortable with, until the next election cycle, if we donate a third of all of our commissions to Black Lives Matter and queer organizations? And they were all down with it, even though I'm the only queer person. So that was really cool. It was also really scary because that's a large chunk of change to donate to those causes for, I think we did it for 6 to 8 months.
Wow.
And it felt really good to actually like do something instead of like posting a black square. But yeah, I have a lot of queer authors come to me whom I adore. There's a pair, Ash and Chess, and they wrote this book called The Gay Agenda that's an illustrated queer history that I sold to HarperCollins. I just signed someone I'm really excited about, Allison Russell. She's a singer out of Nashville. She's blowing up right now. She has a record called Outside Child that's amazing. But she was sexually abused by her father, but the way she sort of rehabilitated her own sexuality through queerness, I think is a really interesting topic. So yeah, I think, my coming out has definitely informed the sorts of clients that I go after and the sorts of voices that I want to lift up. Again, since the murder of George Floyd, I've been very focused on BIPOC voices and BIPOC queer voices too, because they have just never had a seat at the table. And I worry in the publishing world that, it's going really well and I'm selling their books and they're getting the representation that they've never had before. But before, when I would try to sell a person of color's book, the reaction would be, this is just a black audience. Like, we need to sell to white people. And that is so not the case. Like, black women read more than anyone, and there's a huge market. And also for white readers to read black stories. So that's changing now, which is wonderful, and I just really, really, really hope it's not a phase.
Are there ever moments where you're like, wow, like I'm doing everything that I dreamed of?
I wish there were more. I should give myself that sort of space to be like, I'm doing well and I love my job and my authors are changing the world, because they are. My personality is a little bit more like just constantly stressed out, but my wife is such a calming force in my life, honestly. And she, sometimes I'll do a big deal and I'm like, okay, on to the next. And she's like, no, wait, let's talk about how you just got this, Ghanaian West African astrologer, like, a high 6-figure book deal when that would not have been possible before. And she's using West African astrology instead of like the whitewashed, American version. And I also do a lot in this sort of spirituality, like woo-woo space, because I'm personally really interested in that. But I did a big deal for this amazing author. Her name is Dosivia Trudeau. And my wife was like, let's celebrate this. Like, let's go out to dinner and, toast to this and to Dos Via. And she broke through and she's making money and you made her that money. And she's gonna go on to do so many more books. And so she helps me pause and like take stock and be like, okay, I am doing good work.
And what did you do to celebrate? Just go out to dinner?
Yeah, we just went out to dinner. We're both big tequila fans, so we had some tequila and like tacos and
amazing.
Just had a great time. But she's my rock, and she tells me all the time to just remember what I've accomplished, and she tells me how great I am, even if sometimes I can't see it myself.
Is there anything you would want a younger version of yourself to know right now?
I guess just to be more fearless, really. It seems really scary to sort of stand up to authority, or to, even as a woman, just to have a voice in meetings. I mean, you probably get this all the time, and I still do sometimes in meetings, but just like the mansplaining that happens, and like even some of my like straight white male authors whom I adore, and like they just can't understand like why their voices aren't centered right now. But I guess, my younger self, I would just say, just be fearless and, use your voice, and use your voice also to really uplift others who might not be where you are.
Truly, just let's start making these connections and having each other's back.
Love it.
So what are we gonna do to celebrate this?
I think this calls for tequila.
I love that, absolutely.